Hello and welcome to another episode of the Halloween Podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez. In this episode, we're continuing our journey through the decades of Halloween history. We've already explored Halloween in the 1950s and 1960s, and now we're heading into the groovy, gritty, and unforgettable world of the 1970s. The 1970s were a decade of major change in America. Vietnam was winding down. Disco was taking over the radio, and suburban neighborhoods continued spreading across the country. Gas shortages, inflation, and political distrust shaped much of the mood of the decade. But Halloween still managed to feel magical. It was a time when kids could grab a cheap plastic costume from the local store, head out into the chilly October night with a pillowcase in hand, and spend hours going door to door collecting candy. Porch lights glowed across neighborhoods, jack-o'-lanterns flickered in windows, and Halloween still felt like a community event. At the same time, the holiday was beginning to change. Horror movies were becoming darker and more realistic. Stories about poisoned candy and razor blades in apples started spreading through news reports and word of mouth. Television and advertising were beginning to shape Halloween in new ways, and the holiday slowly started evolving into something bigger than it had been before. If you grew up in the 1970s, chances are you remember those thin plastic Halloween masks with the tiny eye holes and elastic bands that never seemed to stay attached for very long. Store-bought costumes during this era were largely dominated by two major companies, Ben Cooper and Collegeville Costumes. Their products filled the shelves of stores like Sears, Woolworths, and neighborhood Five and Dimes every October.
Make Halloween fun and easy. One-stop shopping at Woolworth or Woolco for your Halloween needs. Costumes from $1.83 to $3.99, like $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, superheroes, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, and a new favorite for girls, Holly Hobby. You can get wrapped candies of every kind, bubblegum, lollipops, fun-size candy bars. Get this Halloween record, sounds to make you shiver, just $1.89. Make Halloween fun and easy. Make just one stop at Woolworth or Woolco.
The typical costume was simple. Kids wore a lightweight vinyl smock featuring a picture of the character on the front, paired with a vacuum-formed plastic mask. They weren't especially comfortable, and breathing through them could be difficult after a while, but they were affordable and instantly recognizable. For just a few dollars, a kid could become their favorite television, movie, or comic book character for the night. Earlier in the decade, traditional costumes still remained common. Witches, ghosts, devils, skeletons, pirates, and clowns continued to appear throughout neighborhoods every Halloween. But as the 1970s went on, pop culture began taking over costume aisles in a much bigger way. After the release of Star Wars in 1977, licensed character costumes exploded in popularity. Ben Cooper quickly released costumes based on Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, and Stormtroopers. These became some of the most recognizable Halloween costumes of the late 1970s and helped pave the way for the massive licensed costume market that would dominate future decades. Television also had a major influence on what kids wanted to dress as. Costumes based on the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman became popular thanks to their success on television. Superheroes like Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man remained reliable favorites, while characters from Planet of the Apes and even members of the rock band Kiss eventually made their way onto Halloween shelves as licensed masks and costumes. At the same time, homemade costumes still played a huge role in Halloween culture. Many parents continued making costumes by hand using old clothes, fabric scraps, cardboard, makeup, and whatever materials they already had around the house. Some families preferred homemade costumes because they were cheaper, while others became increasingly concerned about the safety and flammability of some store-bought outfits. Although the Flammable Fabrics Act had been passed years earlier, concerns surrounding costume safety became more noticeable during the 1970s, as Halloween continued growing in popularity. As a result, Halloween nights in the 1970s became a mixture of store-bought pop culture costumes and homemade creations. One kid might show up dressed as Darth Vader, while another wore a chic ghost costume with hand-cut eye holes. That mix of simplicity, creativity, and pop culture helped define what Halloween looked like during the decade. By the 1970s, trick-or-treating had become one of the defining parts of Halloween across the United States. In many suburban neighborhoods, Halloween night meant groups of kids filling the sidewalks just after sunset, moving from house to house with pillowcases, grocery bags, or plastic pumpkin buckets ready to be filled with candy. Porch lights acted as invitations, and entire neighborhoods often participated. For a lot of children, Halloween night lasted for hours. Kids would cover multiple streets, compare candy hauls with friends, and race to the next house before someone else got there first. Earlier in the decade, it was still common for older children to roam neighborhoods without much adult supervision, especially in smaller towns or suburban communities where neighbors knew each other well.
Here's a good idea for Halloween: Wrigley's gum. My kids love it, and it's the treat I approve of. That's because I know Wrigley's spearmint, double mint, juicy fruit, or big red gum is a wholesome treat for kids. It won't spoil their appetites. Each stick is neatly wrapped, ready to hand out, and there's great value in a variety of package sizes. I like this new 50-stick bag. Wrigley's gum is the best idea for Halloween.
Get the wholesome Halloween treat kids love. Wrigley's gum.
Candy itself had become much more standardized by this point. Individually wrapped treats were now the norm, replacing many of the homemade snacks that had once been common decades earlier. Houses handed out favorites like Tootsie Rolls, Smarties, candy corn, Necco wafers, bubble gum, and miniature chocolate bars from companies like Hershey's and Mars. Near the end of the decade, Reese's Pieces were introduced in 1978, quickly becoming another popular addition to Halloween candy bowls. But while trick-or-treating still felt fun and carefree on the surface, the 1970s also marked the beginning of growing public concern surrounding Halloween safety. Rumors about poisoned candy and razor blades hidden inside apples started spreading through newspapers, television reports, and word of mouth. In reality, confirmed cases involving strangers tampering with candy were extremely rare, but the stories spread quickly and created genuine fear among parents. One tragic event that intensified those fears occurred in 1974 with the death of 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien in Texas. O'Brien died after consuming cyanide-laced candy that had actually been poisoned by his own father as part of an insurance scheme. Although the case did not involve a random stranger handing out dangerous candy, many people associated it with broader Halloween fears, and the story helped fuel public anxiety for years afterward. As concerns grew, communities began responding in different ways. Parents became more involved in checking candy before children ate it, and some hospitals even offered X-ray screenings for Halloween candy as a precaution, despite actual tampering cases being extremely uncommon. Churches, schools, and local organizations also started organizing supervised Halloween events and indoor alternatives to traditional trick-or-treating. Even with those growing fears, trick-or-treating remained at the heart of Halloween during the 1970s. The excitement of staying out after dark, knocking on doors, and filling a bag with candy still defined the holiday for millions of kids. But underneath that excitement, the decade quietly introduced a more cautious attitude toward Halloween that would continue shaping the holiday in the years ahead. Halloween decorations in the 1970s were usually simple, affordable, and often homemade, but they still created a distinct atmosphere that many people remember fondly today. Unlike modern Halloween displays filled with large animatronics and synchronized lighting, most decorations during this period relied on basic materials, creativity, and dim October lighting to create a spooky feeling. Many families still use traditional paper decorations that had been popular for decades. Companies like Beistel continued producing colorful die-cut cardboard decorations featuring witches, black cats, skeletons, owls, and smiling jack-o'-lanterns. These lightweight decorations were commonly taped to walls, windows, classroom doors, and front entryways each October before being carefully packed away again for the following year. Inside the home, decorations often centered around black and orange color schemes. Crepe paper streamers hung across ceilings and doorways. Paper honeycomb pumpkins sat on tables, and bowls of candy became part of the display itself. Plastic jack-o'-lantern buckets were everywhere, serving both as decorations and trick-or-treat containers. And of course, carved pumpkins remained one of the most important Halloween traditions of all. Most jack-o'-lanterns were still lit with real candles, giving off a flickering glow that instantly transformed porches and windows after dark. Outside decorations were usually modest compared to modern standards. A glowing pumpkin on the porch, a cardboard ghost in the window, or a scarecrow made from old clothes was often enough to signal that a house was ready for Halloween night. But during the 1970s, some people began experimenting with more elaborate displays and homemade haunted setups. This was the era when early home haunts started becoming more noticeable. Families and neighborhood groups sometimes transformed garages, basements, or front yards into small walk-through haunted attractions using simple household materials. Sheets became ghosts, fishing line made objects move unexpectedly, and cardboard boxes were painted into coffins or tombstones. These setups were usually handmade and low budget, but that often made them feel even creepier. Community haunted houses also became increasingly popular during the decade. Local chapters of the JC's organization helped popularize haunted attractions as fundraisers, often setting them up inside old buildings, schools, or temporary structures. Volunteers dressed as monsters and ghosts, while visitors walked through dark hallways filled with homemade scares and cheap special effects. What made Halloween decorations in the 1970s memorable wasn't necessarily how elaborate they were, but how personal they felt. Most displays were built by hand, reused year after year, and shaped by imagination rather than expensive technology. That homemade quality gave Halloween during the decade a charm and atmosphere that still feels unique today. By the 1970s, television had become a major part of everyday American life, and Halloween slowly started carving out its own place on the TV schedule each October. While there were far fewer Halloween specials than there are today, the ones that did exist became yearly traditions that many families looked forward to throughout the decade. One of the biggest was It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown.
Dear Great Pumpkin, I'm looking forward to your arrival on Halloween night.
They're back, all the little Peanuts characters, in a happy Halloween special, filled with ghosties and ghoulies and things that go bump in the night. Be sure to join Charlie Brown, Lucy, Linus, Snoopy, and the whole gang for It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, Monday at 8, 7 Central and Mountain.
Although the special first aired in 1966, it continued airing every Halloween season throughout the 1970s and became deeply tied to the holiday for many children. Watching Linus wait in the pumpkin patch for the Great Pumpkin became just as much a Halloween tradition as carving pumpkins or going trick-or-treating. Local television stations also played a major role in shaping the Halloween atmosphere during the decade. Throughout October, many stations aired classic horror films late at night, introducing younger audiences to monsters from earlier generations. Universal monster movies like Dracula, Frankenstein, The Wolfman, and The Mummy regularly appeared on television schedules, often becoming a kid's first exposure to classic horror. Many cities also had their own local horror hosts during this time. These hosts would introduce scary movies while dressed in costumes or monster makeup, often mixing horror with comedy. Some delivered jokes or skits between commercial breaks, while others built entire local personalities around spooky late-night programming. Even though many of these hosts were only known regionally, they became an important part of Halloween memories for viewers growing up during the 1970s.
Pretty good, wasn't it? Good evening. Baron von Krept here. Boop. Welcome to my little music room. Many people don't realize that my first love was writing scores for musical tragedy.
Is that what made them tragedies?
Very funny, Igor. You jest, but who can forget some of my most memorable compositions like I Ain't Got Nobody, Peg in My Heart, Fangs for the Memories, Give Me Something to Dismember You By, and many, many more goodies. Oldies but goodies. In fact, even now I am rewriting a script for a new musical called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Cemetery. My producer sent the script back to me last week with his note. He says there are too many plots. I love that word. He said take the hearse out of the second scene. But the hearse is in the first scene too. Why can't I have a hearse in the second scene as well?
The show opens tonight. There's no time to rehearse.
No time to rehearse. I don't believe that, Igor. I don't believe it. You watch this. And you, Igor, when I get you, I'm going to...
Children's television also began leaning into Halloween more directly during the decade. Saturday morning cartoons sometimes featured spooky episodes or fall-themed adventures during October, even if they were not officially Halloween specials. Variety shows and family programming occasionally included Halloween-themed comedy sketches, costume contests, or monster-themed segments as well. As the decade progressed, television also became one of the ways younger audiences were exposed to increasingly intense horror. Older kids and teenagers were seeing advertisements and TV spots for films like The Exorcist, Carrie, and Halloween, even if they were too young to see them in theaters. That exposure helped shift Halloween into something that appealed not just to children, but increasingly to teens and adults as well. What made Halloween television in the 1970s feel special was the sense of anticipation surrounding it. Families only had a handful of channels to choose from, so seasonal broadcasts often became shared experiences. Whether it was a cartoon special, an old monster movie, or a late-night horror program hosted by a local personality, television helped create a version of Halloween that felt larger than everyday life during the month of October. The 1970s marked a major turning point for horror films, and that shift had a huge influence on Halloween culture by the end of the decade. Earlier horror movies often focused on gothic castles, classic monsters, and exaggerated performances. But horror during the 1970s started feeling much more grounded and realistic. The fear suddenly felt closer to home. One of the earliest examples of this change came with The Exorcist in 1973. Unlike many older horror films, it presented supernatural horror in a modern setting and treated the story seriously. instead of campily. Audiences reacted strongly to the film, and its success showed studios that horror could become a major mainstream genre.
Life had been good to Chris McNeil. She was a successful actress. Her daughter Reagan was a happy, healthy 12-year-old. Until that night at the party, when a terrible force entered their lives, and strange things began to happen. Nobody expected it. Nobody believed it, and nothing could stop it.
I'm telling you, that thing upstairs isn't my daughter. You tell me you know for a fact that an exorcism wouldn't do any good. You tell me that!
The one hope. The only hope. The Exorcist. Rated R.
Mother, what's wrong with me?
Just a year later, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre arrived in theaters. Despite its title and reputation, much of the film's horror came from its gritty atmosphere and realistic presentation rather than graphic violence. The movie felt raw and uncomfortable in a way audiences were not used to seeing at the time. Then came Carrie in 1976, based on the novel by Stephen King. The film combined supernatural horror with themes of bullying, teenage isolation, and high school cruelty, helping horror connect with younger audiences in a different way than previous generations of monster movies. But perhaps no film had a larger impact on Halloween itself than Halloween in 1978.
From director John Carpenter, the box office blockbuster, Halloween, Jamie Lee Curtis, in the horror classic of all time. It was a night of terror, and those who survived will never forget Halloween.
What was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
The original Halloween.
Made on a relatively small budget by director John Carpenter, the film introduced audiences to Michael Myers and helped establish what would become the slasher genre formula throughout the late 1970s and 1980s. The movie's suburban setting made the horror feel uncomfortably familiar. Instead of taking place in a distant castle or creepy laboratory, danger was suddenly hiding in quiet neighborhoods that looked very similar to the ones audiences lived in themselves. The success of Halloween also changed how many people viewed the holiday. Halloween night became associated not only with costumes and candy, but with suspense, masked killers, and horror movie marathons. Older teenagers especially began embracing the darker side of the holiday, seeking out haunted attractions, scary movies, and more frightening costumes. At the same time, horror imagery became much more visible in everyday life. Movie posters, television ads, magazine covers, and store displays helped bring horror into mainstream culture throughout the decade. Even people who never saw these movies often recognized the imagery associated with them. The 1970s didn't replace the fun side of Halloween, but they did expand it. By the end of the decade, Halloween had become both playful and unsettling at the same time. That darker edge would continue growing throughout the 1980s, but many of the foundations for modern Halloween horror culture were built during the 1970s. By the 1970s, television advertising had become a major part of everyday American life, and Halloween slowly started becoming something businesses paid closer attention to each October. While the holiday had not yet reached the massive commercial level, it would eventually hit in the 1980s and 1990s. The groundwork was clearly being laid during this decade. Candy companies were at the center of most Halloween advertising. Brands like Hershey's, Mars, Tootsie Roll, and Brock's regularly aired commercials during the fall season, especially during children's programming and family television hours. Many of these ads weren't entirely Halloween-focused, but they leaned heavily into the idea of sharing candy, filling trick-or-treat bags, and preparing for Halloween night.
Halloween is coming, my favorite holiday. I give my friends something special. Nestle bars. They're made with real milk chocolate. And in the spirit of the season, here's what Nestle is doing for me. I get $1 refund with every 2 specially marked Nestle mini bags and $1 worth of coupons in every specially marked Halloween pack. There are my friends now.
Oh!
You scared me.
Nestle bars.
Get real savings on real chocolate from Nestle.
As individually wrapped candy became more associated with trick-or-treating, advertisers started directly positioning their products as Halloween essentials. Grocery stores also began promoting larger bags of assorted candy specifically for handing out to trick-or-treaters, something that became increasingly common by the late 1970s. Saturday morning cartoons were one of the biggest places kids encountered these commercials. During October, candy ads often aired alongside cartoon specials, monster movies, and seasonal programming, helping connect certain products directly to Halloween memories for an entire generation of kids. Fast food chains were also beginning to recognize Halloween's marketing potential. While the famous McDonald's Halloween pails would not appear until the 1980s, the company was already heavily using characters from McDonaldland in advertisements aimed at children during the late 1970s.
As an expert in Halloween, I'd like to give you mamas a bit of motherly advice on tricks or treats. McDonald's Halloween gift certificates. My little monsters haunt me for them. From November 1st to the 30th, each one is good for a regular-sized soft drink at participating McDonald's. A book of 20 costs only $1. Just a nickel a treat. Children like them so much, they'll even come to my house this year. That's McDonald's!
Other businesses started experimenting with Halloween-themed promotions, contests, and seasonal branding as well. Local television advertising added another layer to the experience. Depending on where you lived, TV stations often aired commercials for haunted houses, costume shops, pumpkin sales, grocery stores, and community Halloween events. These commercials were usually low budget and simple, but they became part of the atmosphere surrounding the holiday season. What makes Halloween advertising in the 1970s interesting is how subtle it still was compared to modern standards. Companies were beginning to understand Halloween's commercial power, but the holiday had not yet become the massive retail event it would later become. Instead, Halloween advertising during the decade mostly served as background atmosphere, quietly reinforcing the sights, sounds, and excitement of the season. In the 1970s, Halloween was not limited to just one night of trick-or-treating. Schools, churches, and local communities all played a major role in how the holiday was celebrated, and for many children, classroom parties and neighborhood events became just as memorable as Halloween night itself. School Halloween parties were especially common during the decade. On the school day closest to October 31st, classrooms were often decorated with paper pumpkins, black cats, skeleton cutouts, and orange and black streamers. In some schools, students arrived already wearing their costumes, while others changed into them later in the day before classroom activities began. Teachers and parent volunteers usually organized games, snacks, and small celebrations throughout the afternoon. Cupcakes with orange icing, popcorn balls, candy bowls, sugar cookies, and fruit punch became staples of many classroom parties. Costume parades were also popular, with students walking through school hallways or around playgrounds while teachers and parents admired the costumes. Unlike modern school celebrations, these events were often fairly relaxed and informal. Homemade costumes mixed freely with store-bought plastic outfits, and the focus was usually less about competition and more about participation and fun. Outside of school, churches and local community organizations frequently hosted Halloween parties, fall carnivals, or harvest festivals. These events included activities like bobbing for apples, donut on a string contests, cakewalks, costume contests, and simple carnival games. Many local clubs and civic organizations also organized community haunted houses and family-friendly gatherings throughout October. As concerns about Halloween safety increased later in the decade, some of these organized events also became alternatives to traditional trick-or-treating. Parents appreciated having supervised places where children could celebrate Halloween in a more controlled environment. Even with those changes, the overall feeling remained festive and community-driven. Halloween in the 1970s still felt like something neighborhoods experienced together. Whether it was a classroom party, a church basement filled with decorations, or a local carnival at the community center, these gatherings helped make Halloween feel bigger than just a single evening in October. One thing that made Halloween in the 1970s feel so memorable was the atmosphere surrounding the season. It wasn't created through massive displays or advanced technology, but through simple sights, sounds, and traditions that together gave October a feeling all its own. Music played a surprisingly important role in setting that mood. By the 1970s, Monster Mash by Bobby Boris Pickett had already become firmly connected to Halloween and returned to radio stations every October. Novelty songs, spooky sound effect records, and haunted house audio albums also became popular at parties and school events. Many of these records featured creaking doors, thunder, chains rattling, howling wind, and ghostly laughter, designed to create a creepy atmosphere without relying on anything too frightening. Halloween parties often used dim lighting, candles, black lights, or colored bulbs to transform ordinary living rooms and basements into makeshift haunted spaces. Even simple decorations could feel eerie in low lighting. Paper skeletons cast strange shadows on walls, jack-o'-lanterns flickered in dark windows, and familiar rooms suddenly felt different once the sun went down. For children, small novelty items became an important part of the Halloween experience as well. Plastic vampire fangs, fake mustaches, rubber masks, glow-in-the-dark stickers, prank toys, and joke shop items were widely sold throughout October. Stores often filled seasonal aisles with inexpensive Halloween novelties that kids could buy with allowance money or pick up while shopping for costumes. Flashlights also became closely associated with Halloween nights during the decade. Long before glow sticks and elaborate light-up accessories became common, kids carried flashlights while walking between houses or crossing dark neighborhoods during trick-or-treating. The beam of a flashlight cutting through cold October darkness became part of the overall feeling of Halloween itself. What stands out most about Halloween in the 1970s is how much of the atmosphere depended on imagination. There were fewer large-scale decorations and fewer distractions competing for attention. Simple sounds, dim lighting, cool autumn air, and neighborhood excitement all combined to create a version of Halloween that felt personal and immersive. For many people who grew up during the decade, that atmosphere remains one of the strongest memories of all. It wasn't necessarily louder or bigger than modern Halloween celebrations.
I, Speedy McGreedy, have created Frankenstein Mouth.
I want juicy burgers.
We'll go to Hardee's.
The burgers are juicy at Hardee's.
Right, Ivan. Hardee's job roils them.
Let's say hello to Hardee's.
It's Halloween time. When you buy a burger and soft drink at Hardee's, you get a coin to put in the fun machine, which gives you a Halloween prize.
I got a creepy crawly Halloween thing. I got a Halloween ring.
The fun machine at participating Hardee's.
Looking back, Halloween in the 1970s feels like a bridge between two different versions of the holiday. It still held on to much of the simplicity and community spirit that defined earlier decades, but at the same time, you could already see modern Halloween beginning to take shape. The decade saw the rise of licensed costumes tied to movies and television. Horror films became darker and more realistic. Advertising and television began pushing Halloween further into mainstream popular culture. Concerns about safety also started changing how parents approached trick-or-treating and community events. And yet, despite all of those changes, Halloween during the 1970s still felt deeply personal. Neighborhoods came alive after dark. Kids wandered from porch to porch, carrying pillowcases full of candy. Classrooms filled with paper decorations and costume parades. Local television stations aired monster movies late into the night, while jack-o'-lanterns flickered on front porches. The decade managed to balance fun and fear in a unique way. Halloween was still playful and community-driven, but there was also a growing sense of mystery and unease surrounding the holiday that had not been as strong in earlier generations. In many ways, the 1970s helped create the version of Halloween we recognize today. It laid the groundwork for the explosion of horror culture, seasonal marketing, home haunts, and pop culture costumes that would dominate the decades that followed. But for many people who experienced it firsthand, Halloween in the 1970s is remembered less for how big it was and more for how it felt. Cool autumn nights, plastic masks, flickering pumpkins, monster movies on television, and the feeling that, for one night each year, the ordinary world became just a little bit stranger. That's going to do it for this episode on Halloween in the 1970s. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out our previous episodes covering Halloween in the 1950s and 1960s, as we continue exploring how the holiday evolved through the decades. If you have any questions, comments, or want to suggest a topic for a future show, send me an email at thehalloweenpodcast@gmail.com. You can also visit us on our website, thehalloweenpodcast.com. Don't forget to check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/thehalloweenpodcast. Also, find us at instagram.com/thehalloweenpodcast. Thanks again for listening, and have a good night.